Welcome to the world of CDR Beer Lab, the fast and easy-to-use analysis system designed for breweries of all sizes. With CDR Beer Lab, you can monitor in real time the quality of your beer, from the grain to the finished product, analyzing parameters like bitterness, color, alcohol content, and much more, all directly in your brewery. No more waiting for lab results. As the Brewfeast brewery claims, with CDR Beer Lab, the immediate benefit was undoubtedly the speed of execution in the various analyses that we undertake here in-house in the internal laboratory. Simple, accurate, and fast. With CDR Beer Lab, controlling every stage of production is within everyone's reach. Let's discover how to enhance your beer with a professional tool and immediate results.
Howdy. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the role of natural antimicrobials and how they can safeguard low and non-alcoholic beers from pathogenic bacteria and just general microbial spoilage. So first, I'll start with a little introduction. My name is Matt Stocek. I'm a research chemist, and I provide technical support to our sales staff here at Chinova Bioworks. I have a BSc in biology, where I concentrated in molecular microbiology from the University of New Brunswick, and I'm a beer drinker and an all-around beer enthusiast. And as I said, I work for a company called Chinova Bioworks. We're here in Canada, and we are a food technology company, and we use an eco-friendly process to extract a natural fiber from white button mushrooms to create our flagship product, Kyber. And it's a natural, clean label ingredient with antimicrobial capabilities. So first, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the rise of non-alcoholic beer. I'm sure most people watching this are probably aware that non-alcoholic beer has seen a huge rise in popularity. It accounted for 5.5% of global beer sales in 2023. The market's actually expected to grow from 34 billion to 51 billion by the year 2028. And I think a lot of this surge in popularity for non-alcoholic beer is driven by a growing consumer knowledge about the health risks of alcohol. And you still want to go out to the bar and you still want to hang out with your friends, but there's still that social pressure to sip on something and just socially drink. But you want to be able to do that without having to consume as much alcohol as you'd maybe not like to. And so that's where non-alcoholic beer comes in. Unfortunately, non-alcoholic beer, unlike regular beer, lacks a lot of the antimicrobial properties that alcohol naturally provides and leaves them very susceptible to microbial spoilage. And when it comes to microbiology, brewers should treat non-alcoholic beers kind of like a juice or any non-alcoholic beverage, which is to say it's very prone to microbial spoilage. If you were to compare non-alcoholic beer to a calorie-reduced orange juice, for example, just from a nutritional standpoint, they're almost identical. And if you look at this chart over here on the right, you can see that the process of making and then distributing orange juice involves several steps of pasteurization, chilled or frozen storage, and cold and aseptic filling. So clearly in the juice world, for a long time, the idea of protecting your product from microbial spoilage is taken incredibly seriously. And it's our belief here at Chinova that non-alcoholic beers should be included in that level of seriousness when it comes to microbial protection. And so even though this is a relatively new trend, there's not a huge amount of research about the microbiology of non-alcoholic beers. What we do know just from studies published last year is that low alcoholic and non-alcoholic beers can harbor and then grow several pathogenic strains of E. coli and even salmonella. And further research has shown that beverages with a pH above 4.2, starting to get out of that acidic range and more into that kind of neutral-ish pH range, these are beverages that tend to be prone to pathogenic bacteria risk. And unfortunately, that pH range is right about where low alcoholic and non-alcoholic beers sit. And as I said before, in the non-alcoholic beverage world, such as the orange juice world, a beverage that can grow these kinds of pathogenic bacteria or a beverage that lies in that pH range is always going to be subjected to an AFTO accredited process authority, just so they can make sure and they can review the safety of the beverage with its processing conditions and make sure that that beverage is in fact protected against microbial spoilage from these pretty nasty pathogenic bacteria that can cause quite a lot of health issues for your customers. And so the gold standard right now for protecting your low and non-alcoholic beers from microbial spoilage are, of course, tunnel pasteurization. And these are incredibly effective methods. They're tried and true. They work very well. But if you're a smaller brewer, if you're a microbrewer, if you're a nano brew, you might not necessarily have the kind of resources available to you or even the time to access tunnel pasteurization. These are incredibly expensive machines. And if you can't afford it, then a lot of the times you might have to send your product off to a third-party company and they'll pasteurize your beer for you. And that can really cut into your time, into your budget, and it really ends up adding up at the end of the day. And moreover, if you look at the pasteurization units necessary to fully sterilize a standard beer, this chart over on the right, a standard beer with an IBU of 6 only requires 14 pasteurization units. And if you look up at the top, a non-alcoholic beer with a similar level of IBUs requires 6 times the amount of pasteurization units. So you're requiring a lot more pasteurization units to get the same level of protection in a non-alcoholic beer. And those high pasteurization units essentially end up degrading a lot of your volatile hop compounds, which can result in bad flavors, and they can change the aroma or the flavor that you're working so hard for and you're planning out at the beginning of your process. You know, you want to be able to have a delicious, tasty, non-alcoholic beer, but you don't want that to come at the cost of protecting your beer and protecting your customer from these nasty microorganisms. And furthermore, a lot of these pasteurization units, the higher the pasteurization unit, essentially it limits the amount of carbonation you can have in your beer, because sometimes the can will just explode during the tunnel pasteurization process. And like I said before, a lot of this just increases your general energy usage and cost of production. So unless you're a large macro brewery or you have the kind of resources to be able to do this, it's not really going to be an option that's very accessible to you. But beyond tunnel pasteurization, there's a few other methods that brewers have in the past and even today continue to use to stabilize your non-alcoholic and your low alcoholic beers. In the processing technologies, we've already talked about tunnel pasteurization, but there's also flash pasteurization and filtration. And these are great. These are fantastic methods, but again, these are expensive and they don't actually guarantee microbial stability because the beverage is treated before it ever enters the can. And so cans typically in this process aren't treated aseptically, and the interior of the can might have, you know, a few little hidden spores here and there, and you treat your beer and then you put it in the can. There's actually a potential for spoilage after that fact. And so you're paying all this money and you aren't really necessarily guaranteed a lot of protection in your beer. And we've got synthetic preservatives, but of course those come with a lot of added health issues and just equipment costs for maintaining those kinds of hazardous chemicals in the same, presumably in the same warehouse where you're brewing. And then we've got natural preservatives, and that's where Kyber comes in, flagship products. And so Kyber is essentially just a blend of chitosan fibers, and chitosan has historically been extracted from leftover crustacean shells using a very intensive process that involves a lot of energy and a lot of pretty nasty chemicals to extract that chitosan. And chitosan is just derived from chitin. Chitin is a simple fiber that makes up the cell wall of a lot of organisms. And among those organisms are not only crab, shrimp, and lobster, but also mushrooms. And that's what we're doing. We're extracting chitosan fibers from white button mushrooms, and we're basically ensuring that our end product, our end antimicrobial products, is not only vegan, but it also doesn't trigger any allergenic responses from people who have shellfish allergies, and it doesn't have any heavy metal contamination. So it's a tried and true antimicrobial that actually science has known about since the 1920s, so for a long time. And actually, chitosan from these crustacean sources has been used a lot in the past as fining agents in the beer world. So it's not a new ingredient to the beer world, but the source of the chitosan, in our particular case, is new. And like I said, it's a natural fiber just found in white button mushrooms as well. The kind of method of action is that chitosan as a fiber has a net positive charge coating the molecule. And as some of us might be aware, a lot of bacteria, actually all bacteria, yeast, mold, all microorganisms have a net negative charge around their cell wall. And so that positive charge from the chitosan interacts with that negative charge coating the cell wall of the microorganism, and it actually shears it apart and causes cell leakage and eventually death of the microorganism. And this isn't something that resistance can be evolved against, because this negative charge around the cell wall is necessary for their own survival. So you can't evolve away from that. And that also has the effect of chitosan being bactericidal. So a lot of synthetic preservatives are bacteriostatic, meaning they just suppress growth. But as soon as that preservative falls out of the beer, the growth can proliferate. But chitosan is bactericidal, meaning it suppresses growth through killing the microorganisms. So there's no more microorganisms left in your beer, and your beer is essentially protected. Moreover, chitosan actually has no impact on flavor or aroma. And the way we extract it currently is from upcycled mushroom stumps from farmers, and it's in a very eco-friendly process relative to the chitosan that's extracted from those crustacean shells that I talked about earlier. And that's a very nasty, expensive process to do that. And so kind of as a proof of concepts at Chinova, we validate a lot of our mushroom chitosan fiber effectiveness at eliminating spoilage through what we call an antimicrobial challenge test. And we do this in samples of non-alcoholic beer. And so what we do is we dose our non-alcoholic beer with Kyber, and then we inoculate it with microorganisms, and we plate it on selective media. And then we count the colonies over a 21-day period to assess how the population is changing over that time period, because it's not an immediate killing of every single microorganism, but it takes place over a number of days. And so we like to look at how that population changes over time and how effective chitosan is. And a few results here are 3 different pathogenic bacteria inoculated at 6 log CFU per mil. So that's 1 million colony forming units in every milliliter. And so this 6 log CFU is inoculated into NA beer samples dosed with 0.2% Kyber, which is 2000 ppm. And the bacteria we included were that pathogenic strain of E. coli I mentioned before, E. coli 0157H7, and then Salmonella. And then we included another bacteria, Listeria monocytogenes. And these are very common pathogenic bacteria that can really have severe effects for human health. And so you look at the chart on the right, you see that initial count at 0 day is at log 6. And then by the time you reach 21 days, you can see just how drastically the population changes over time. You get fewer and fewer and fewer until there's a point where at 21 days, the microorganisms aren't able to grow anymore, and the population is effectively 0, and that is because of Kyber. And so we move on, and we just want to look at just general spoilage microorganisms, not necessarily pathogenic ones, but just common spoilage organisms like Saccharomyces cerevisiae, brewer's yeast, or Brettanomyces or Pseudomonas. You see the exact same thing, actually, even by day 14. All of these populations have been reduced to 0 in these non-alcoholic beer samples that have been dosed with Kyber. And these are inoculated at 3 log instead of 6 log, but still 3 log, which is about 1,000 CFU per mil, is still significantly more number of yeast or mold or bacteria cells than you're ever going to actually see in a sample of beer. And so this is kind of it's exactly what we call it, a challenge test. We're really challenging these beer a lot more than they'd ever see just in a mash tun or anything like that. And so you see that each spoilage microorganisms population is reduced to 0 by day 14 by this 2000 ppm or 0.2% Kyber dose. And just a few other characteristics of Kyber relative to tunnel pasteurization. If we look at the energy consumption per can, tunnel pasteurization requires 38 watt hours per can. And that same can, if you were to dose it at an appropriate level with Kyber represents only 0.05 watt hours for that same can. And while tunnel pasteurization uses a lot of high temperatures and pressures, this ultimately means that there's a carbonation limit that you can have in your individual cans before the can explodes. So you're very restricted in what kind of carbonation level you want to see in your beer. On the flip side, Kyber doesn't place any restrictions on carbonation level, and it doesn't affect any of your carbonation levels. And it actually doesn't have any impact on flavors or your nutritional content either. And then you look at tunnel pasteurization for that same can of beer, those high temperatures and pressures, those higher levels of pasteurization units that are needed for non-alcoholic beers degrade your flavor that you've worked really hard for during this entire process, and can, in some cases, really affect the nutritional content of your beer. And so in conclusion, just to wrap things up a little bit, these low alcoholic and non-alcoholic beers, it's a very exciting trend. It's a great time to be alive and to be drinking beer. But a lot of these LA and NA beers should be treated like juice, and that should come with all the regulation and all of the safety measures and all the overhead that juice, for example, would require. And I think we just need to proceed cautiously. And a lot of these LA and NA beers can support a lot of microbial growth, and they need to be handled accordingly. And so that's kind of where we come in as a partner. We offer natural, effective solutions for ensuring this kind of microbial safety across low and non-alcoholic beers. And essentially, we're allowing smaller brewers to avoid these costly and high energy consuming tunnel pasteurization processes. And all the while, we're supporting sustainable practices and doing it in an eco-friendly way. And so at the end of the day, this is really all about maintaining the flavor and aroma, making the best tasting NA beer while ensuring that it's safe to drink and you're not going to run into any microbial spoilage problems or any kind of pathogenic bacteria. And I just want to thank everyone for listening to this talk. If you have any kind of questions, you can reach me at the email below, or you can reach our website. But if you're interested in more of our studies, if you're interested in the sample, please feel free to reach out. And I really look forward to hearing from you. And yeah, thank you for listening to this talk. I appreciate your time. All the best and happy brewing.